Thank you, Board. For our next action item this evening, I'd like to ask our Finance Director, Ronnie Jackson, and Chief Financial Officer to come forward. This is something that we've been discussing for, I believe, a month now. It could be.
We're here to discuss the renewal of the audit contract. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's correct.
This is not correct.
Not
What's on the screen?
monthly finance report.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jumped ahead of the game.
No,
Okay. So a motion is in order to approve the extension recommendation for RFP 0815 audit services. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Love.
Second.
Second, a motion by Mr. Daniels. Do I have any discussion? Well, you can start if you'd like.
No, if you don't mind, I just have some questions for clarification. I know that's probably a shock. I know that the purpose of the planning meetings, we were told, was to ask questions so we can find out more information and better understand the votes we'd be taking tonight. And just to make sure I have some things correct about what I learned at the planning meeting, the recommendation to extend the contract comes to us from the audit committee. Is that correct? Correct. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't. Did the recommendation come from the audit committee?
Yes.
Yes, it did.
Okay. And it's my understanding that the audit committee is organized by the Board of Education. But I was also told at the planning meeting that the members of the audit committee are chosen by members of the audit committee. So it's kind of a rotating basis. Is that correct? Is that how members of the audit committee are chosen?
I'm not sure how the members got appointed. The members have been there since I've been there. I mean, since I've been here. I know Board Member Love has been the board representative on the audit committee to communicate our discussion with you all.
And the audit committee got together to discuss the charter because there were issues with people coming to the audit committee meeting. Mm-hmm. Attendance, there was certified representative, equity council representatives, and there was never enough people at the meeting. So the the audit committee chair, Dave Osborne, reached out and gave names of people he thought would be very beneficial to the board as community representatives because we had people not coming to the meeting.
Okay. And as a committee of the board, the audit committee is subject to Open Meetings Act. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
To my understanding, it is. But I also understand that whenever there are decisions that are made with certain decisions related to a contract, that particular part is not necessarily open to Open Meetings Act.
Mm-hmm. My understanding of the Open Meetings Act is if that is the case, then there has to be a call into closed session from a public meeting. Do you know if that was done to discuss the contract?
I'm not aware of that. I do not know.
Okay. My understanding of the audit committee charter says the board or its nomination committee will appoint members of the committee and approve the committee charter. Were the current members of the audit committee appointed or approved by the Board of Education or a nomination committee of the board?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding you.
Were the current members of the audit committee approved by the Board of Education?
The current contract that we have now?
No, the current members of the audit committee who recommended the contract extension.
I'm going to go ahead and say I believe so, as that's part of our policy. I know that one of the things that I have been working on is we're going to plug you two into some of the committees, and we're kind of rotating our committees, and I've been working to reassign committees and bring that forward here in upcoming weeks. So I am going to assume, but this was prior to my term on the board, but I know based on what I'm going through now and trying to plug you and Mr. Nash into some committees, that I assume that my predecessor did the same.
Well, and let me just kind of go in, again, some history. So one of the things that we did when we got ready to actually get the audit committee established as well with some other standing committees was that board members recommended initial folks to kind of serve in that capacity. So those initial group was actually there. So John kind of served in that role on the audit. I think, Ray, you served before me?
Briefly, yeah.
Just briefly. Ray became chair, then I moved into that particular role from a board member perspective. Now, to your question around the actual composition after we actually got established, not really sure how we've done that. I think the goal was to make sure that we are having an external view by bringing people from the outside, whether they were board appointed or if people on that particular committee, especially those folks that were like Dave and others who were outside of that, outside of Fayette County, would say we're looking for people with expertise externally to be able to come on board.
No, and my concern is there seems to be there are a lot of assumptions being made, which concerns me because the audit committee is supposedly recommending this extension to us, but it's unclear whether or not open meetings requirements were followed. It's unclear how the members were chosen, if they were chosen in accordance with the charter. My understanding is that we had Professor Dave Osborne here last time. He was unaware that we'd been using the same managing partner for 8 years. That's alarming that the chairman of the committee who's making these recommendations doesn't know that. The minutes of the October 2018 meeting reflect that they were being conducted by Mr. Jackson, who's not the chair of the committee, which concerns me about the independence and the arm's length relationship between these independent members of the audit committee and our finance staff. So I'm concerned on whether or not that we can proceed with a recommendation from a committee that we're not clear is following OMA standards or the charter of the committee or board policies or procedures. I mean, before we proceed, would it not be advisable for the board to get a third-party review to make sure that these policies and procedures have been adequately followed before we take this recommendation?
Well, I appreciate that you tagged into that because after the questions have been raised by this board, as the board chair, I employed our contracted legal services to do a review and to go over all the correspondence, to look at the board minutes, to review anything that had been given to us. And that person, our contracted services, did issue an opinion that we had followed best practices as far as auditing, that we had not violated our policies, within our policies, and had actually shared that they felt that your interpretation was incorrect. And I felt like at that time, and this was prior to our last planning committee meeting that I was not at, but that information was shared with all board members, the outside legal opinion that we did contract to get. I also spoke with you before I left for San Diego and said that if you had any additional questions or concerns that you felt would help that external entity making decisions, and you stated at that time you did not. Now it appears now you do have some additional concerns that you feel that these should have been provided to our external legal counsel. Am I correct in understanding that now you have some additional questions that you did not have when I spoke to you 2 weeks ago prior to me leaving for San Diego for the conference?
Just a couple things. One, my assumption was that the audit committee charter and OMA were readily available to our legal counsel. Number two, another parliamentary inquiry, am I at liberty to quote from the opinion we received from legal counsel, or is that privileged? Am I able to quote from that at this meeting?
I'm going to defer
To Shelley.
to Shelley. If the board approves it.
I can't hear you from back there. And
because my concern is that what we were communicated has been misrepresented.
Attorney-client privilege belongs to the client. So the client in this case is the board as a whole. So whether or not you wanted to reveal what was communicated to the board as a whole is up to the board as a whole, as the client.
So would you like to make a motion that we, I think that's what we need to do at this moment, is you need to make a motion that you would like to share the legal opinion that we received.
I make that motion that we share the legal opinion we received as it relates to the audit.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Nash. Do I have any further discussion or questions? the motion, just for the minute's sake, is whether or not to share
The legal opinion.
with, yes, what he just said, to share the legal opinion that we received that I contracted out for.
No, it's still, that motion is still.
That motion is still out there.
We're under discussion.
This is a motion within the motion. You there? All right, any further discussion or questions? All approved, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. All right, you may share.
Thank you. Just some key things that stand out to me, because at question in the request we made to legal counsel was we had an administrative procedure in place that said we practiced rotating auditors, and that procedure was changed by administrative staff. So the attorney advised us that it is the purview of administrative staff to change administrative procedures. And he says the administrative procedures are not created by the board, nor do they direct the board's actions. A superintendent, through creation of an administrative procedure, cannot dictate the board's actions on any topic. He does tell us that policy 4.9, which we're discussing tonight, later does require competitive bidding. And he also notes that there's an erroneous statement within the administrative procedure, because the administrative procedure doesn't mention competitive bidding. But he also goes on to say nothing stated in the administrative procedure is controlling on the board. The board retains the ultimate authority and discretion to determine the frequency with which auditing services will be put out for proposals, the length of time to utilize the same auditing firm, and what commitments would be required of a firm in order to continue utilizing a firm which has been used previously, such as rotation of managing partner, etc. He also says if an audit committee is designated by the board to screen proposals, that committee is a, quote, public agency under the Open Meetings Act and would be required to conduct its work in public meetings with proper and timely notice to the media and etc. So I don't read anything in his recommendation that conflicts with the point that some of us have been trying to raise throughout this process, that it's the board's purview to approve a contract for the auditing services, and if the board says that best practices indicate we should rotate, then that's the board's purview. So I'm also concerned because legal counsel has advised us that the audit committee is subject to open meetings, and I haven't gotten a clear answer at this meeting or the planning meeting that those meetings have been conducted in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. So I'm not comfortable proceeding with a recommendation from a committee that may not be following the Open Meetings Act.
Well, according to KRS 61-810, exceptions to open meetings up under N, it says meetings of any selection committee, evaluation committee, or other similar group established under KRS Chapter 45A, which is this one, or 56, to select the successful bidder for award of a state contract. So it is an exception.
At this point tonight, as I am going to share that I am comfortable moving forward. I feel that I have slowed down this process. I feel that I have hired external counsel to do a review. I want to thank all the members of the community who have contacted me and who have reached out to me and have said, you know, we feel comfortable with you behind the helm. We don't believe that you've done anything wrong. I want to even thank partners from the companies that did not receive the bid who have contacted me to say that they feel that we followed practices and procedures and that they believe that we hired a firm that has a strong history with school districts. Additionally, I want to make it clear that we cannot exclude, one of the things we saw in the legal opinion was, can we exclude them from bidding in the future? And we cannot exclude anyone from bidding. And so then that's what could bring them back in the future if we go through the process and they are it. As far as our policies, after the audit in 2014, we did change a lot of things based on the state auditor's recommendation. And one of those were some of these policies that are in discussion tonight. And one of those is that we would rotate the auditing, we'd bid every 5 years. And so doing that policy in 2015 and this being 2019 means that we are in the correct space for our 5-year timeline that we set amongst ourselves. I don't believe anyone up here plans, the issue on the table is to extend this contract one more year, and then we want to, I think the board unanimously, and we've not voted on this, but I think I'm speaking for everybody, wants to take it out to bid in accordance with our policies and our procedures. Again, we cannot exclude anyone from bidding at that time. So at this point, I feel confident in moving forward. I am very appreciative of the questions and the fresh eyes approach. I think it was great for us to step back and to slow down and to look at it. I think it was great for us to have some strong conversations about it, but at this point, I am comfortable moving forward. Is there any other discussion?
You know, Madam Chair, I would just say this. I think when I think about the overall spirit, when we put together this particular committee, the spirit was to be able to have an external view with individuals to kind of come in and as we start to think about it. So I think about, was there any type of malicious intent around certain things? And since I have been sitting in this seat, constantly we come back, and if we see a flaw in a policy, we kind of come back and try to address that. So I am all in favor of, if we move beyond tonight, to continue to have the committee come back, look at some policies and some recommendations to bring back to this particular board. To your point, I don't think we want to exclude any type of firm, especially if they're a high-quality firm, just because we don't want to necessarily have that firm come back and then settle for someone else who is not as skilled as that particular firm. And then I would also recommend, for the sake of transparency, that Will, as I have rotated on this particular committee, that you can now serve as the board representative, because I think it is important, therefore, that everyone has an opportunity to get a chance to see, to work alongside, and having that view, it's more transparency around that, and then you can kind of understand a little bit more, and then I think as a board member, you can articulate and take some of the concerns that you heard tonight and throughout this discussion. Do you feel comfortable doing that?
I don't know if they're going to invite me, but I'd be happy
You'll be
to
fine.
serve.
You'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Just to be careful, I am going to pause for the moment, and I'm going to make a motion that we put Mr. Nash on the audit committee. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Love. Any further discussion?
Is there a totality of committees I should be considering? Is there a certain number that we serve on? Is there a particular reason we're doing this now?
We can do it later if you'd like us to do it later.
Well, I just think you mentioned earlier that
I was only doing it now because Tyler has raised the point that we need to have a motion before we add. So that is why I was doing it right now. But
Well,
there are several committees, and if you would like me to hold the process, I will rescind my.
Well, I think it's fair to say that Tyler's passionate about this subject. I don't want to disclude him from being involved. I don't know if he wants to be either, because again, I don't know what the options on the table are. I am happy to serve on the audit committee. But
I think, and I'm fine with Mr. Nash being on the audit committee, but I think we're getting distracted from the core issue here. I mean, the issue before us is about maintaining public trust, and it's, you know, Vice Chairman Daniels talked last meeting about moving our district from a B standard to an A standard, and that should be the mindset that we're thinking of. Is turning a blind eye to a lot of these concerns that are being raised and not addressing some of these procedural problems, right? This is not just an audit issue, it's a procedural problem that we have a committee that appears to be not following its own charter, that's not following Open Meetings Act, and we're sitting here as a board taking a recommendation from them without saying, wait a minute, let's figure things out first, and getting an independent review, getting insight from and truly a third party that doesn't have any allegiances to any administrators, and making sure that we're doing the public's due diligence. That, to me, should be our number one focus right now. We can sort out who's going to be on what committee, what have you, but what's before us is this audit piece, and I think that should be the focus of this board right now.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to rescind my thing for my motion. So I'm going to table my motion. I'm going to come back at the next meeting, and we will talk about all the committees and assign and introduce everyone as to who's on what at that time. And at this time, in what you just said, I think we're just at a point where we have to agree to disagree, because I feel that we did hire external, and they have my conversations, both over email and my verbal conversations as board chair, I have spoken with our council, is that this is simply, or not simply, because it's a rather complicated issue, but your interpretation of the procedural issues is not actually accurate, and that I feel confident in that. That is what my conversations have been. So at this point, I think this is one of those where we talked about when we were new board members, and sometimes we're going to agree to disagree. I feel very confident that I have slowed down the process as the board chair, and that we have conducted ourselves and done outside, and we need to move forward at this point. And so that's where I am at this. So with that, any further discussion? I will call a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
No. So the motion passes 3-2, with Mr. Nash and Mr. Murphy being the no votes.
Great.
Thank you, Board, but I do want to add that Dr. David Osborne has given his time as a community member to serve as the chair of the Audit Committee, and I'm not going to allow a board member to disparage him in public in that way. That's number one. Number two, I find it very much repugnant to imply that somehow there's this lack of arm's length dealing when it comes to a firm and an administrator, a district administrator, speaking particularly about Mr. Jackson, to imply that without anything more. I find that very much repugnant to do that. And so I want to make that, I just want to state that very clearly. And I do that each and every time. We're not here to have individuals badger and bully district administrators. I'm not going to tolerate it. We're not going to stand for it. You conduct yourself with the appropriate decorum at all times. With that said, our next action item is fairly routine. Don't interrupt me. It's fairly routine matter. Twice a year, we seek board approval on school-wide fundraising projects. Our school chiefs are here this evening if you have any questions related to school-wide fundraising projects.
So a motion is ordered to approve the request from the above schools for school-wide fundraising projects on the date listed. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Daniels.
Second.
Second by Mr. Nash. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, board members. Next item was placed on the agenda by board member Tyler Murphy. I will turn the agenda over to him at this time.
Thank you. And just to clarify again, my concern is about the process, not with individuals. No prior comment I made was targeted to individuals. It's just about the process and the appearance that's important for the board to make. So as a board member charged with oversight of administrative staff, I think that's important to note, and I'm just trying to do my job and do my due diligence in that regard. None of it is personal, and I hope that's understood by all.